Hello there! We all know that the key to improving is making studies. Sitting down and making careful copies of the real world or other artists' work with the express purpose of learning something and building a visual library you can use at the time of making your own drawings. But I'm gonna be honest, it never worked for me. I think the problem is that I find it stressful and unrewarding, especially when studying characters. The copy never ends up looking as good as the original, and I never feel like I've used my creativity or challenged my drawing skills. Well, it's been a while now that I've been working on a new system or method to sort of replace that way of learning. And I think I've come up with something really interesting. In this video, I will show you a really powerful technique that makes it so effortless and fun to learn complicated stuff that feels a bit like cheating. And what's more, you can easily turn the results into your own original drawings with very little work. But before that, a quick plug. I've been working on a new character design course for beginners that makes use of this technique and also heavily expands on it. I plan to release it at some moment before the end of July. And to celebrate the new course, from now until I release it, you can get a pack with all my old courses, plus the new one when it comes out, for a special price. There is a total of 11 full courses, about 70 hours of content on character design, background design, game art and more, mostly using Inkscape. So if you're interested in learning something new and helping the channel out, it's only gonna be available until I release the course, hopefully before the end of July. After that, the pack will be gone. Link in the description. That was all. And the first step of my method starts the same way than the traditional way, getting something you would like to study. For this video, I'll pick this simple character that looks amazing and should be relatively easy to study for all of us. This is not mine, sadly I couldn't find the name of the artist, but hopefully somebody in the comments can help us with that. A couple of tips for picking the right material to study. Keep at all times in your mind your own abilities as an artist. Pick a reference that fits with your skill level. If you're just starting out, don't pick a drawing by Kim Jong-gi. What you want is to be challenged, but still have certain amount of solvency to work fast and learn more effectively. You don't want to get stuck on a drawing for hours. Also, I would avoid any drawing that makes use of anatomy if you aren't familiar with that topic yet. This technique can be used for learning anatomy, but that's a whole different beast that I'm not getting into now. And here comes the important part. I'm gonna lower the opacity and trace over the main shapes, and only the main shapes. I don't care about those small details, just the big shapes that makes up the whole design. You want to end up with a simplified version of the design made of simple geometrical shapes. Here you have to use your brain to decide what's important enough and what can be ignored. This part is not hard to do, but it can be tricky if you're not used to ignoring the small shapes and focusing on the big elements. There's a lot more to this step than what you may think, depending on the complexity of the design you're going for and the areas you want to focus. Sadly, I don't have the time to go over that now, but I will cover that in the full course. And the end result should be basically some sort of mannequin with the proportions and shapes of the original art. Now we can dress it up with the final line. In fact, I would strongly recommend you to do that now. Lower the opacity and start copying the details over. This step is not necessary, but you wouldn't be losing anything, and it will only help you be more familiar with your subject. But here's the thing, that is not that important now, especially when you're just starting out. What we care now is about getting an intuitive sense of the shapes that makes the illustration and what is being communicated. And that's where the next step comes in. This is the most important part of this method. What we're gonna do now is to take the mannequin we made and make variations, changing the sizes and proportions and making new mannequins that use the same shapes but looks completely different. Squash and stretch each shape, make them smaller or bigger, modify them if you're feeling adventurous. Do try to respect the relationships and connections. If you see a shape under another in the original, it will be a good idea that the new mannequin keep that same shape under the other as well, even if you completely change the proportions. Your goal is to vary the design of the mannequin, not to make something completely different. And I think you realize the idea here is to explore the different ways the same shapes makes up completely different designs. Of course, don't do this just one time, make at least 5, 10, 20 variations. They will only help you get a more intuitive view on how different shapes and proportions affect the design. One of the things I found to be the most boring about making studies is copying the proportions. It feels useless to me since the proportions are unique for each character. It's not something you're gonna use or learn from. On the other hand, here you're actually practicing and evaluating how the proportions affect the design and seeing it for yourself, all without having to stress about making an accurate proportionate copy. And the final step is adding the details on top, just like you did with the first drawing, but this time basing yourself on the new mannequins you drew. If you followed my advice of not changing the relative placement and connections, then adapting the details to the new sizes and locations should be a breeze. Remember that you don't need to be super precious with what you're drawing. This is all for the sake of learning. You're not gonna show this to anyone. So the drawing doesn't need to be pretty. Try to be accurate to a certain point, but the more you do, the more you learn. The idea here is to learn the different ways shapes and sizes and proportions can completely change the way a drawing looks, as well as forcing you to improvise with the reference you have, which is what you'll be doing most of the time when you draw your own things. And that is the key to the whole exercise. You're not mindlessly copying something, you're forced to adapt it and make it work with slightly new configurations. You're forced to think. The exercise will only be complete once you adapt the details to every single one of your different versions you've made, or at least 5 to 10 of them. The fact that you're forced to do the details over and over again is important here because you're memorizing them, building that visual library, and at the same time you're thinking about them, learning to adapt them into different contexts. You're also becoming more and more expert at these particular details since you're doing them over and over again, which makes it easier for your brain to offload that burden and focus on being creative, which again is important when you're making your own things. I don't really think I need to mention this, but I will just in case. It's very important that you know that this is only for learning, not for showing. These are not really your own drawings in the same way that grabbing an image online and applying some filters in Photoshop does not make it your own. There's still work to do here, and having some of these can make up for a really strong base, especially if you're bringing more reference, but we won't be going over that in this video. I do go on detail on how to transform these into your very own drawings in the full course though. And that's it. As you can see, this is a really fun way to learn and study because it feels like you're drawing new things rather than mindlessly copying. If you're interested in learning more about this technique, especially how you could use it to make your own characters, make sure to like and subscribe. I'll be making more tutorials that summarize or employ ideas that will be covered in my course. Also, let me know what you think about this video in the comments below. That was all for now. Bye.